led Ethiopia in an effort to regain control of Upper Egypt. With Thebes and most of Egypt under Asian control, a plan was launched by Pianki and the Ethiopian generals to recover Thebes and once again establish it as the capital. Now this, of course, is 715 to 656 BC. We're talking late in the history of Egypt, around the time what would become the 25th dynasty. The article I was trying to find from Horizon magazine spoke about the fact that during the course of time between Egypt and Nubia, that as invading people would be let into Egypt or would come into Egypt, it would almost always result in some kind of decline in the culture. And when the decline took place, the article said that time after time, the Nubians would come from the south into Egypt, stabilize Egypt, and go back home. And that's important. Yeah. Because these days, don't nobody come and stabilize nothing and go back home. Apparently by the 25th dynasty, or dynasty, they say dynasty in Europe, by the 25th dynasty, things had gotten so wild that when the folks came from Nubia, they did stay to try to keep stability, because we're quite late now in the last part of the history of Egypt. And so much damage had been done to the culture by people coming in that it was very hard to maintain it. And that's the time period being talked about now. 23 centuries before Pianki and Tehakra, King Menes founded the first Egyptian dynasty. That's what history says. It's not quite clear whether Menes was a real person or mythology. Becoming the first pharaoh of the world, uniting Upper and Lower Egypt under his leadership and establishing Memphis as the first all-black capital city. Thebes being the capital city of the north, or Upper Egypt. The time period is 715 BC. Now we're back to this time period. Pianki and Tehakra have made strategic plans quite similar to those used by Menes in 3100 BC, a good almost 3,000 years before, to defeat the enemy. This 25th dynasty should be of special importance to the black world, since it marked the end of an all-out effort by blacks to reclaim Egypt. After reclaiming Egypt, Tehakra led his armies against the intruding Assyrians, defending Israel, who was his ally. He is therefore in the Bible in two places, 1 Kings 19:9 and Isaiah 37:9. Tehakra reigned for approximately, now of course, when Preacher Jones read that passage to you, either 2 Kings 19:9 or Isaiah 37:9, he probably didn't tell you he was talking about African people. He probably thought he was talking about some Semites or some kind of light-skinned people. Tehakra reigned for approximately 25 years. He dominated the largest empire in African antiquity, covering more than 1,500 miles, including all of the Sudan. Even though Tehakra was in an endless battle, he started construction projects so grand and with such splendor and magnificence, none of which could be matched. Pianki and Tehakra left a legacy for the black world to recapture that which has wrongfully been taken away. There are more periods, by the way, in Nubia than in Egypt. There were different styles, we'll see. It's believed that perhaps the whole pyramid process began in Nubia, that it was made more grand in Egypt because of their availability of different kinds of building materials than that which was had in Nubia. Microphone, Kwaku, the brother.
Actually, that's where you find the oldest temples at, the further you go south in Nubia. All the older architecture, that's where that is in Nubia and beyond. It's not around Cairo. Basically, the only thing Cairo's got is the pyramid.
Yes.
And a couple, but the older, these temples we talking about, all that is around Aswan and south of that, south of Cairo. Cairo.
Now, this is a drawing of Tehakra. This is not an actual picture, of course. Tehakra was king of Egypt, pharaoh, and a member of the Nubian or 25th dynasty of Egypt, whose reign is usually dated to 690 BC to 664 BC. He was also the son of, here's a different spelling of Pianki. As I say, you'll see it several different ways. The Nubian king of Napata, who previously conquered Egypt. Some records say that he was the son of Pianki. Some say it was his brother. It's not quite clear. Tehakra indulged in rebuilding the temple of Kawa, across the Nile from present-day Dongola, which became a major center for the Nubian kings. He built at a number of other sites in Nubia, as well as performing restoration work at the Temple of Karnak. It was during his reign that Egypt's enemy, Assyria, at last invaded Egypt. With the microphone to Kaba, with the invasion of the Assyrians, we then have a never-ending cycle of folks invading Egypt one after another till we get to the present-day situation. Brother Kaba,
This is just self.
see a smile on your face.
It's just self-serving because I love every time I hear Taharka because my son's name is Johnny Taharka, and I named him after Taharka. And also when you look at that the leopard skin that he had on,
Yes.
that represents royalty and so forth. And you find the same thing in West Africa now, in particular. I think it's Mali and Senegal, and then they also found it in South America among some of the people down there, the Aztecs. You know when they came before Columbus, has a lot of that in there also.
Now, Shabaka is another one of the rulers. Again, it's not quite clear to me from the literature whether he's the son of Taharka or another relative, comes after Taharka. Shabaka ruled Egypt from 716 to 702 BC. I'm sorry, it was not clear whether he comes before Taharka. It's not clear whether they're father and son or brothers or whatever. But Shabaka is important because of the Shabaka stone that we'll see in a moment. I just threw this in. This is I can't pronounce her name. This is the daughter of King Pianki. A sphinx of her was done. I threw this in because to show that, once again, the whole concept of designing sphinxes is not just Egyptian. It was something that was consistent through the whole area. It was a way of presentation. Now, here's a chart that I found, and according to this chart, Pianki is here, Shabaka is there, Taharka was here. That would seem to indicate Shabaka being a son of Pianki rather than a brother, and Taharka being a relative, descendant of Shabaka. But again, that's not really all very clear at this point, to me, at least from reading the various sources. But they're beginning now to try to construct charts and whatnot of the dynasties of the Nubians, just as we've had done for years of the Egyptians. Now, this is the style pyramid we're talking about in Nubia. They're much narrower, much taller, much more thin. And this is a site, ancient city in northern Sudan on the Nile River, north of Khartoum, the capital of a Kush dynasty from 530 BC to AD 350. It was noted for its iron smelting and casting. Once again, because our people are not considered to be very important, and because we have not as yet taken up our cause to make our places important. These places are now in ruins. This site, as well as any other, could very well be restored and become a center of commerce and tourism and everything else, and historical importance. But we have to make that important to us, because it's our thing. As long as we don't invest any capital in it and any importance in it, we really can't expect other people who are not directly connected to it to do it. Yes, ma'am. Microphone.
Thank you. Could you explain what I asked earlier about the foothills of the moon? Where is that?
There are two places called the foothills of the Mountain of the Moon. One is Mount Rwenzori is that Kenya? I'm sorry, Mount Rwenzori and Mount Kilimanjaro. They are both called the Mountains of the Moon, and they are both Uganda. I think Kilimanjaro is in Uganda.
Kenya.
Kenya.
The others in Uganda.
Then Rwenzori would be in Uganda. Okay, so
Would these be Bantu people today around there?
I think that's probably correct. Bantu speaking people, Yeah, because I guess Bantu is a derivation of the Mandi. Yes.
Will Obenga write about this at all?
I don't know.
Okay,
I don't know.
thanks.
But then that's but the
The other question about Moreau, I think it was in a lecture by Van Sertima.
Mhm.
They were trying to decipher the meanings. In other words, it's not only the loss from destruction of water
Mhm.
of some of these materials, but it's also an inability to decipher
Yes.
the language of those things that are available.
the writing of Moreau and the people of many areas of Nubia and Kush have not been deciphered, primarily because they have not as yet had the good fortune of finding something like the Rosetta Stone. Did you want to make a comment on
Yeah,
that?
they actually Obenga has started translation as a book. I think it's called The Deciphering of the Meroic Script. It's a small book, blue cover, and he did decipher some of the symbols, but they're still working on it. But yeah, I got the book a few years ago. I think you have it too, right, Kaba?
I don't think
That deciphering? No.
What's the name of
I know.
The Deciphering of the Meroic Script. It's by Theophilo Obenga.
Here again, we're going back to the same thing again. Most of this research has been done by Europeans because it's been done from that approach. They have to have a translation media. They have to have something like the Rosetta Stone. When they found the Rosetta Stone, they found information written in hieroglyphics that had been translated into two other, at that point, modern languages. So they could compare the hieroglyphics with their modern language and kind of a diminutive of that modern language to say, okay, this means that. So we now have a translation medium. Europeans have to have that if they're going to do the work because they're not connected with the actual people who used to speak that way and write that way. We have much closer connection if we can recognize it. Now, there's a book, of course, by Daqua.
Alex Dark?
Yeah,
African wrote the Bible?
yes, after he wrote the Bible. One of the points he makes is, yeah, because he's from Africa and his people speak a derivation of the language that led to Hebrew, he can give more insight because he knows what the words and symbols mean. So that, once again, now he has not been given much credit that I've seen in the European media because, he's not European and he has an approach which is totally different from the one that, that they're making. But so we have to begin doing the work so we can credentialize ourselves as the experts and say what the stuff really, really means. Much of the Meroic text has not been deciphered. There are a number of references. They've got the references there. They just can't read them. And their approach to reading them is probably much more extenuated than our approach would be if we could raise some scholars up who are linguistically familiar with native African languages and the changes that have taken place in those languages. They could probably much easier translate the works as Obenga's doing because he is, of course, trained in that kind of discipline. So here again, the work remains on us to do that. The area of the Nile known as Nubia, that lies within present-day Sudan, was home to three Kushite kingdoms during antiquity. The first with its capital at Kerma, that's 2400 to 1500 BC, according to what they say. They're centered on Napata in 1000 to 300 BC, and finally that of Meroe, 300 BC to 300 AD. And of course, they moved further south in later times as Egypt falls to the Assyrians and other people who come into Egypt. The Nubians move further into inland to get away from the onslaught. Some of this is talked about in Aikwe Amar's book, 2000 Seasons, how we move to escape confusion. And also Destruction of Black Civilization by Chancellor Williams. Okay. Each of these kingdoms were strongly culturally, economically, and politically and militarily influenced by the powerful pharaonic Egyptian empire to the north. And the Kushite kingdoms in turn competed strongly with Egypt, to the extent that during the late period of ancient Egyptian history, the kings of Napata conquered and unified Egypt itself, ruling as pharaohs of the 25th dynasty. My take on that is not that they conquered Egypt out of the normal European desire to conquer things, but they're making one more attempt to stabilize things in an area that they had previously been in communication with, that had now declined because of the interminable invasions of outsiders. Did you have something to say?
Yeah, if you don't mind. Again, I just wanted to bring out that the Tasseti, which was Nubia, Nubia, which is Tasseti, was the forerunner of Egypt. So there were 12 kings or so in Tasseti, and the last one went up and unified Upper and Lower
Saying 12
Egypt.
kings before Menes was given credit being the first one in Egypt.
Exactly. So
Okay.
that's why we, and that unfortunately that doesn't mention that. That kind of like skips around. In fact, the earliest period that mentions is 2400 BC, whereas Tasseti, I think, would be, and somebody help me out if they know, 4000 or so BC. It was like 1,000 years
Yeah,
roughly
before
before
that.
Egypt came
Yes.
online.
Yeah.
Right. So, that I think that needs to be, considered when in this discussion,
And then that, even with a little bit of stuff that we now know, we know enough to blow holes in some of the things that we see presented as accurate information. The Nabatean domination of Egypt was relatively brief. It ended with the Assyrian conquest in 656 BC, but its cultural impact was enormous, and this coalesced into an extraordinary burst of pyramid building activity that was sustained throughout the existence of Napata's successor kingdom, Meroe. Kush or Kush, K-U-S-H or C-U-S-H, was an African civilization south of ancient Egypt and Nubia, which is located in the modern-day North African nation of Sudan. Though influencing Egypt, it was a distinct culture and civilization and was one of the earliest civilizations developed in the Nile River Valley. The first developed societies appeared in Nubia around the time of the first dynasty in Egypt. Of course, we know that that's not correct, because we know that, as we said just now, there's record of at least 1,000 years before that. What happens very often in scholarship is that people read something and they repeat it. They think it's correct. They repeat it for a long time. We had tails. Nobody took the effort to see we didn't have tails. They repeated for a long time that we were so stupid, didn't make any sense trying to educate us. Nobody took the time to try to educate us.
That's why they wrote all this stuff down, because they figured we'd never be reading it.
But, I've mentioned this before, not to digress, but if you assume that people are too ignorant to educate, then you really don't have to pass any rules against educating them. The very fact that you pass the rules against educating them must mean that you're scared of educating them. Okay? I'm not going to do all this. I just wanted to show some of the information which is out there. The first known Kushite state was the kingdom of Kerma, which appeared around 2600 BC, which is 1,000 years late, and at times ruled all of Nubia and parts of Egypt. Little is known about these peoples because no writings have been found from them. Yes, we have writings.
And you know what?
We can't translate some of them.
If you go down to the African Museum, whatever that is, down at the Smithsonian. Down at the Smithsonian, they have a display of that, and they talk about how it's strangely similar to Egypt, but it's not really Egypt.
Yeah.
Because it's so south.
Yeah.
They don't want to make that connection. It's basically the same kinds of people, the same kinds of artwork and everything, but they don't want to make that connection.
Egyptians began moving south, and through them, the most of our knowledge of Kush comes. Actually, they moved the other way, but it's all right. But this expansion was halted by the fall of the Middle Kingdom of Egypt, about 1500 BC. Egyptian expansion resumed, but this time it countered organized resistance. Historians are not sure whether this resistance came from the multiple city-states or a single unified empire. There's also a debate over whether the notion of statehood was indigenous or borrowed from the Egyptians. Again, Europeans credit the ability to form states to your level of intelligence. So they see the fact that you have a fully developed state as saying that you are progressive people. So once again, they don't want to talk about pharaonic empires in Nubia, because that would then say that they had developed states, which means they were not backward people. I've heard Malefi Asante talk about the same subject. Europeans say that the demarcation between you being intelligent and just being, ordinary run-of-the-mill is the ability to have rational thought. And they credit the Greeks with rational thought. They don't credit the Egyptians with rational thought. And the question that Asante asked was, how did they build the pyramids? Irrationally? So some of this stuff is really, when you look at it, we will one day have the story written correctly, and at that point, all this stuff will go in the trash. But right now, at least if we can see the holes in it, we can then begin to look for how we're going to make it better. The Egyptians prevailed, and the region became a colony of Egypt under the control of Thutmose I, whose army ruled from a number of sturdy fortresses. The region supplied Egypt with resources. I'm almost finished with this.
As we
Yes, sir.
study this ancient archaeology and the ancient history, can we say that we could trust writers like Massey? Or who can we, because a lot of this, like you say, is people either don't know what they're talking about or they outright distort it. So as we continue to study, I, for one, would like to know, what can I kind of put my faith a little bit more in? Would it be someone like Massey or this guy Budge or who?
What is faith?
Faith, meaning
what is belief?
Without having to nitpick everything I'm reading.
Well, you have to nitpick everything you're reading. You're going to have to nitpick everything you're reading because, what I present is limited by what I know and understand. I'm sure there are many things I don't know and understand.
Well, as category, who we put more, credence in than others?
I'll tell you a little story. I've told the story
Maybe
before
2 or 3 writers.
about a young man who was at Harvard University, and the professor, who was a noted PhD, and maybe had several PhDs, was lecturing on Herodotus, and he said that everything Herodotus said was correct, except when Herodotus said that the people of Egypt were black. The professor said that was totally incorrect. And the student raised his hand and said, Doctor, whatever, I tend to go with Herodotus. And the professor was quite insulted. He said, how dare you say that? I'm Dr. So-and-so, and so I've got 3 degrees, and this is all his publications and whatnot. Why would you think that Herodotus would, know more about